Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Millions of people across the country are casting their votes in local elections. A decision on interest rates due any second now. We'll discuss what that means for you and your finances. And we've got a political panel talking about the big issues of the day. I have a fabulous interview with Labour MP Peter Kyle. He is dyslexic and had a really rough time at school, but managed to get 2 degrees and make it to Parliament.
Good afternoon, it's 12 o'clock. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Interest rates are expected to rise to their highest in 13 years when the Bank of England announces its decision any second now. The base rate is set to go from 0.75% to 1% as the bank tries to bring rising inflation under control. In fact, we can confirm that that has happened. It has raised to 1%. Matt Dromfield is head of Debt Free London. He says inquiries have soared 250% since this time last year.
Many people think that you go into debt because you've splurged on a credit card or you've overspent on the weekend and not realise it. That's really not the situation whatsoever. Debt doesn't discriminate. We're all facing a cost of living crisis, with the cost of your mortgage maybe going up later today, depending on the Bank of England's announcement, your rent going up, your food going up. All these are essential costs that you can't control, and you're left with nothing at the end of the month.
So we can confirm that the Bank of England has raised its key interest rate from 0.75% to 1%. Now, there are renewed calls for the government to impose a windfall tax on energy companies after oil giant Shell reported a big increase in profits. The company revealed record first-quarter results of £7.2 billion, triple the amount it made in the same quarter last year. It joins rival BP in posting better than expected profits for the first 3 months of 2022. Surging oil and gas prices have helped offset the cost of boycotting Russian supplies. Polling stations are open across the UK as millions of voters take part in the local elections today. The Prime Minister took his dog Dylan with him as he cast his vote this morning. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer's also voted alongside his wife. And the Liberal Democrat's Ed Davey visited his local polling station too. Voters are choosing local representatives in England, Scotland and Wales. And there's also an election for the Northern Ireland Assembly. In Ukraine, the governor of the eastern city of Luhansk says 5 civilians have been killed in shelling in the last 24 hours. A further 25 are reported to have been hurt in a Russian missile strike in Kramatorsk in Donetsk. The city's mayor says a school and kindergarten were damaged in the attack. Meanwhile, President Zelensky is asking the UN to help ensure the safe passage of 200 civilians from the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. More than 300 people were evacuated from the besieged port city yesterday. That didn't include anyone from the steelworks. Former British Army commander and chairman of the Cobra Intelligence Group, Colonel Richard Kemp, says Russia's determined to crush the remaining resistance at the steel plant.
I think they will use, maybe, as we're hearing already today, increasing ferocity to clear them out of there, and it probably won't take much longer. I've heard talk of Russians considering flooding the cellars and the chambers that they're hiding in order to either drown them or flush them out, and I think that's quite a likely possibility if they haven't already done it.
And the UK is providing £45 million in funding to help the most vulnerable in Ukraine. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says the money will go to women and children who face increased risk of sexual violence and exploitation. The UN estimates nearly 16 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance in the country. The UK and Japan have agreed a new landmark defence deal as the Prime Minister hosts his Japanese counterpart in London. It's Fumio Kishida's first official visit to the UK. The pact allows British and Japanese forces to deploy together to carry out joint exercises and disaster relief. Doctors are being asked to delay their retirement to help clear the COVID backlog. In a letter to staff, NHS England is asking them to stay on to help plug the 110,000 personnel shortage and help train up junior doctors. The General Medical Council says 21,000 doctors are due to retire this September. Buckingham Palace says the Queen will miss the annual Royal Garden Party season. The monarch will instead be represented by other members of the royal family. Her Majesty has mobility issues and has missed a number of engagements this year, but she continues to carry out virtual appearances and other duties. And we head into space next. A warning, some of the footage contains flashing images.
And I relinquish control of or command of the space station to you. I accept command.
NASA astronaut Tom Marshburn has handed control of the International Space Station to Russian cosmonaut Oleg Artemyev. The Endurance crew said their farewells before undocking the Dragon Hatch capsule from the ISS. The long-duration team, 3 Americans and a German, are returning to Earth after 6 months in space. This is GB News. We'll have more as it happens now, though it's back to the briefing with Gloria.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, the Bank of England has just raised interest rates to 1%, their highest level for 13 years. Our economics editor, Liam Halligan, will talk us through what that means for you. Broadcasting rules mean we can't discuss the local elections, but we can talk about today's big political issues. I'm joined by former Conservative and Labour advisers to chew over the cost of living, Partygate, Beergate and more. And I have a really inspiring Realme interview with Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary Peter Kyle. He's overcome dyslexia, which means he has a reading age of 8. It wasn't diagnosed till he was in his mid-20s, and he had a rotten time at school. And are you taking your dog with you to vote? We'd love to see them. Email your pictures of your pooches at the polls to gbviews@gbnews, and we'll show our favourites at the end of the show. The Bank of England has just raised interest rates from 0.75 to 1% in a bid to tackle soaring inflation. That's the highest they've been for 13 years. Well, here to tell us what this means for us and our finances is our very own economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Well, Liam, how is it going to affect us?
As expected, the Bank of England have raised interest rates to 1%. Before that global financial crisis in 2008-9, interest rates used to be up at 4%, 5%, even double digits back in the 90s, as we will remember. But they've been ultra low since 2009, over the last decade, and they're now going up. The Federal Reserve in the US raised interest rates yesterday. The Bank of England's raised interest rates today. The fourth time in as many months. There's big momentum. And what that means is it's a little bit better if you've got savings. If you're lucky enough to have some money in the bank, you should get a bit more money, though the banks are often quite slow to pass on those rate rises. It's for people who are indebted that this will really hurt. If you've got a mortgage, then your mortgage rate will go up. If you're on a variable rate and an extra, what we say is 25 basis points, that means 0.25%, which is what the Bank of England's done today, from 0.75 to 1%. That's going to cost you a couple of £100 on an average mortgage a year, on top of your tax rises, on top of price rises. So a lot of people will feel that. Also on credit card debt, Gloria, the Bank of England's also released some numbers which won't be noticed today because everybody's focused on the interest rate decision, but I'm going to highlight them. They show that credit card debt now in the UK in March was 10% up on March in 2021. That's a big increase over just 1 year, the stock of outstanding credit card debt, because clearly a lot of households are struggling to make ends meet and they're starting to stick spending on their credit cards. Well, credit cards are on a standard variable rate. That credit card borrowing is now going to become more expensive. So I strongly urge you, if you have got credit card debt, do whatever you can within reason to pay off that credit card debt.
Right, interesting. And I just want to ask you about a think tank report that's come out today. Finding, when times are tough, we often think it's going to be only poor people or people who are really, really struggling. But actually what this report says is that it's middle-income families are being newly pushed into crisis. It's not just the traditional people that fall into poverty, it's middle-income families too.
We've seen this emerging for quite a few years, Gloria. What Theresa May, I think, rightly called the just about managing classes. Not so much people on benefits, though, of course, people on benefits are suffering. You and I, on both our respective shows, have highlighted that a lot. Rishi Sunak, in his spring statement, we were sort of gobsmacked, weren't we, when we were presenting that back in March, that benefits only went up by 3.1%, that annual upgrade, when inflation, the cost of living, is going up by 7, 8, 9, 10%. So obviously, the most vulnerable people are affected the most. But what we're seeing now is that even families that would see themselves as quite comfortably off, families that own their own homes, family where you have, not wealthy, but they have a mum and a dad in work, doing quite well for themselves, they are now really struggling because, we talk about 7 or 8% inflation, and that's what the Office for National Statistics says it is. I think in reality, if you're looking at necessities, food, fuel, housing costs, inflation's much more than 7 or 8%, actually. And so a lot of families are now struggling, and it means that discretionary spending that you go to work in order to do, to take your family out for a meal, to have a decent holiday once or even, fingers crossed, twice a year. It's those kind of add-ons, those additions that for many people are the reason they work so hard to provide for their family, things that bring them pride that they have done well for themselves in life. They're going to start to be cut back in the months to come. And I say this with no pleasure, though I do predict it is going to sour the political mood.
Liam, your show immediately follows mine.
As ever, I'm in your wake.
I love your show. We all love your show, and we all benefit from your expertise. Thank you, Liam Halligan. So, many mortgages are about to get more expensive and prices are soaring. Our reporter, Rosie Wright, is out and about in London for us, finding out how people are being affected. Rosie.
Good afternoon, Gloria. Yes, as we've been hearing, the interest rate goes up to the highest rate it has been in 13 years. And Liam's there just been talking about mortgages. So what impact is that going to have on the housing market? Well, I'm in a leafy area of South London in Clapham here. And joining me in this estate agent is Kesha, who's the branch manager here. You hearing that change to the interest rate, what impact do you think that's going to have on the housing market?
To be completely honest, even though it's gone up and it's the highest it has been in 13 years, the reality is that it's still low in comparison to what we previously have seen. So it's still cheaper in most instances to buy than what it is to rent, particularly as rentals have gone up in their fastest as well over the last 12 months in the area and particularly around London. So, at the moment, with the price hikes that we have seen over the last 3 months, we haven't seen it impact the market so much. I'm sure it will be a topic of conversation, but, the interest rates that the banks are offering to the first-time buyers they've already taken that into account over the last 12 weeks or so. We haven't really seen it impact us. I'm sure over the next 12 months, with the cost of living, that will probably affect the market, but I'm sure right now it's still really low.
Let's talk about the cost of living, because we've just been hearing as well this is going to have an impact on people who've got credit card debt. One of the big changes there's been over the last few months is the rise in rents.
Yes, the rise in rents has been extortionately high, and I think that's, like you say, impacted the cost of living quite dramatically, which in some instances is why Help to Buy or parents helping their children get onto the property ladder has been the best time ever to do so, because, rather invest in a property that they can pay their mortgage off over the next, 30, 40 years, get onto the property ladder in an increasing market that we do see in London in any case over time, is better than paying rent that you'll never see again. So again, like I say, Bank of Mum and Dad is a big investment in first-time buyers, and their generation are used to 5, 6, 7% interest rates. So for them, 1% is still really good. So yeah.
The one piece of research that came out yesterday from Nationwide is that a lot of people who are planning on buying have actually thought, we're just not going to be able to get that deposit together, though, because of the rising cost of living, our electricity bills. Might that now have an impact?
It probably will, yes. There's no doubt that it's going to impact future decisions and whilst you're still saving. But over the last 2 years, with a lot of people having worked from home, they've actually managed to save much faster than they had, previously, with not having to go into work every day, not having to pay for travel. So in that instance, I think right now people still have their deposit. They are ready to buy and they want to get onto the property ladder. So we have seen an increase over the last few months of buyers coming to market because they want to get, stuck in, and they want to, put their mortgage down and, get a property. So over the coming months, over the next 6 to 12 months, the cost of living and people who are trying to get a deposit together, they probably will have a bit more difficulty.
Thank you very much for giving us your insight and your analysis to what's happening, particularly here at this branch in South London. But as we've been hearing across the day, the cost of living, teamed now with the rise in interest rates, is really starting to bite. A little later on, we're going to be speaking to people in real financial difficulty about how they are managing their finances.
Rosie, thank you so much for that. After the break, I will be talking about the stories of the day, the week, with my fantastic panel. I'm joined by Tom Hamilton, former Labour advisor, and James Starkey, former advisor to Priti Patel, amongst many other cabinet members. Back in just a moment.
Millions of people across the UK are heading to the polls in a vital test of Boris Johnson's premiership. This isn't just about Westminster. These are local elections. Chance for you to decide how your community is run. We'll be talking to senior politicians, election analysts, our team of reporters around the country, and of course to our team here in the studio. And we'll have comprehensive coverage of the elections to the Northern Irish Assembly. That's the UK Votes 2022 from 10 a.m. tomorrow morning here on GB News, the People's News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
So what's been dominating the political news this week? Should the culture in Parliament change? The cost of living crisis keeps increasing. What can be done to tackle that? I'm joined by a fantastic panel today. Tom Hamilton, former Labour advisor, is in the studio with me, and James Starkey, former government advisor to many cabinet ministers, joins us from his house, I think, or his office. Welcome, both of you, to the show. First time for Tom Hamilton. Welcome back, James. Twice in a week. You must be good. Right, I'm going to start, James, by something that people might be wondering why we're not talking about the main thing that is happening in politics today, the fact that millions of people are going out to vote. But we can't really talk about that because broadcasters are subject to rules about that. Yet, if you look on social media, everyone's going, I'm voting for X and I'm voting for Y, and here's my, vote this way today. I mean, does it feel a bit out of date, those rules governing what we can and can't talk about?
Hi, Gloria. Thanks so much for having me on again for the second time this week. It does feel quite strange, because I've been sat here this morning doing some work watching GB News, and then when I flick to my social media, of course, the news is quite different. There's big news today, which is the interest rates related to inflation. But, when you go on Twitter, which I think many of us like to do to pass the time, it's dominated by that of which we cannot speak.
Very well put. Same question to you, Tom, without, of course, mentioning any detail about what's happening today.
Well, I don't know what's happening today. But that's why we end up with people talking about, dogs at polling stations and all that sort of thing, because those are the sort of non-political things you can talk about. The thing about polling day, of course, is that no one knows what's happening. I mean, we can all speculate about who's winning and who's losing, but we just don't know. And certainly having worked for a political party, the Labour Party in the past, on election day, you spent the whole day wondering whether you're going to win or you're going to lose. If you work for the Labour Party, you're going to lose. But you didn't in my day. Yes. But there's not a lot to say. It's just guessing.
No, that is true. James, I'm going to come back to you. Obviously, as you said, interest rates have gone up today. I mean, the biggest political issue, the biggest issue for people is the cost of living. I wanted to get your reaction to a government minister who said yesterday that we should all buy value brands at the supermarket to make things easier. It might have actually been quite a sensible thing to say, but is it a wise thing to say in politics?
Well, I work with George, and he's a great man. I think I was chatting to a friend of mine who's an MP today and saying it's one of those innocuous things that you or I could say on here, or Tom could mention, and no one mentions. But of course, when a minister says it around what is a sensitive topic, people are really struggling with the cost of living. Any one of us, no matter of our income, will have seen a significant percentage rise in energy bills, and it obviously affects you depending on your income. And I think it is one of those, it's a sensitive issue to people, and it's a sensitive time. And, I'm sure Tom as well will say, working as a special advisor, when I used to have to deal with media, it's one of those things when you see it, it can quite easily get picked up. But you also know it is a fairly innocuous comment, and is certainly, knowing George, very well-meaning.
Yeah, fair enough. Tom, you've worked for many senior Labour politicians. You worked for Ed Miliband when he was Labour leader, and I was an MP at that time, and all actually we talked about was the cost of living back then. David Cameron and George Osborne at that point were talking about getting the deficit down. I mean, they won that argument. If you take as winning an argument, they became the biggest party for the first time in decades, actually, by focusing on the deficit. Is there a danger that Labour could make the same problems?
I think it's different now, and the main reason is that the Tories aren't talking about the deficit either. You can argue that they should, but Boris Johnson doesn't talk about the deficit. Rishi Sunak doesn't talk about the deficit. Everyone's aware that the cost of living is a really big issue that all of us are facing in different ways. And I think what's really striking is that the government hasn't really got a lot of answers to it. So they keep on saying we're going to do our best to solve the cost of living crisis, but without saying what they're going to do. We talked about possibly raising benefits. They say they can't do it because of a computer problem. There's a small loan back for energy bills, which you've got to pay back in your next bills later in the year. There's nothing very big. And there are all sorts of reasons why it might be hard for the government to act, but as it happens, they're not acting, and they're not arguing that that's because of the deficit either. So I think it's difficult for them to make that argument. That's not to say that Labour have done everything they need to do to win the next election, but I think they've certainly, banging on about the cost of living is definitely one of the things that they're going to have to do, not least because all of us recognise that it's a real issue. And, with the news today about interest rates and the expectation that inflation is going to go up again by the end of the year, it's just going to get worse before it gets better. So, there's no question if Labour wins the next election, they won't have been left a sort of a golden economic legacy by the Tories of the kind that they used to talk about back in 1997.
Back to you, James. Cost of living crisis is, of course, difficult for the government, but actually the Labour Party has spent quite a lot of time talking about parties. Do you think, and I know you're a former government advisor, so I'm not sure you're the right person to direct this to, but just try and be objective a bit. Do you think that the Labour Party took their eye off the ball a bit by focusing so much on parties?
Look, I do think they did do that, and I think in a way it's backfired, as you can see with the issue around, whatever your view on it, the fact that it is dominating the press, that about Sir Keir Starmer. And I think, to Tom's point as well, I think both parties need to tell a better story when it comes to cost of living. I think, it will dominate the debate from now until the election. That's not going to go away. And I think, speaking to people, there are different views on parties, often depending on their own experience during lockdown. But by and large, what you hear most, whether you're talking to a potential, a Labour supporter, a Conservative supporter, is what we really want to hear about is what are you going to do about cost of living? And I would argue that the Conservative stories need to be better on that. And I would argue that Labour don't have much concrete policies in that area either. And as you said, I've spent most of the past few months talking about parties, which is, perhaps now slightly backfired on them.
Slightly backfired because, of course, there's all this scrutiny on Durham. Both leaders arguing that they were at work, they took a break to drink and to eat. They're actually very similar defences.
Well, they're quite similar defences, but there's one really quite important defence, which is that the Prime Minister has been fined and the Chancellor has been fined for what they did. And as I understand it, the Keir Starmer case was looked at by the police and then dropped. Now, clearly, if that changes, then the story changes, but it hasn't changed. And it's been interesting watching the media talking a lot. And to be fair, it wasn't just the Labour Party banging on about parties in Downing Street either. The media did a lot of that work, and Labour had a choice of saying, yes, this is bad, or just ignoring it. And they were never going to ignore it, to be fair. But I think, given that the Tories and the media are now pushing the Starmer case, I think there's a potential problem with that, in that the Starmer case only makes sense as a story if it's predicated on the fact that the Prime Minister has already been fined for having breached lockdown. That's not disputed. We know he did that. And every time you talk about Keir Starmer, you're reminding people that Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak did the same thing. There may be more fines to come. We don't know what's going to happen in the next few weeks. But it's a defence of the Prime Minister that rests on accepting that he did the wrong thing and he shouldn't have done it. So I'm not sure how far it goes. And meanwhile, not a lot seems to be happening on this Durham case. There's a story today. We've got one paper saying it was terrible that this happened because everyone else had to be stuck in their homes all day, and another paper saying, well, this is terrible because he should have gone to one of the 15 or 16 restaurants that were open in Durham at the same time. Now, I don't know what the story is. I don't know what the accusation is anymore. I thought I did. I don't anymore. All I know is that they're keeping the focus on parties at a time when actually Labour wants to talk about the cost of living.
Thank you for that. We've only got about a minute left, so this is a short question to both of you. You weren't elected, but you both worked at the top level of politics as advisors. Are your memories of doing that very stressful job, James, broadly happy or miserable?
Well, as you know, Gloria, I came on earlier in the week to talk about my mental health campaign, No Time to Wait. I think, so there were certainly times for me that it was very, very stressful, but I wouldn't swap my time in politics and in government and working for the people I did for the world. It was a really great experience for me personally.
Brilliant. Same to you, about 30 seconds.
I agree with that, with the massive caveat that we didn't get to work in government during my time advising the Labour Party, except at the very beginning, after which we lost an election. But no, it's stressful, it's hard, but it's working for a cause that you believe in with interesting people on stuff that everyone cares about, and there's nothing better to do.
Brilliant. Really enjoyed having both of you on. Tom Hamilton, former Labour advisor, and James Starkey, former government advisor. Thank you for your time today. After the break, we've a moving Real Me interview with Shadow Secretary for Northern Ireland, Peter Kyle. His dyslexia wasn't picked up until his mid-20s, and of course he had a rough time at school. Plus, what is it like to be a candidate for an election? I'll be joined by our one and only Alex Phillips. That's after the news with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Gloria. It's coming up to 12:30. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England has raised its key interest rate from 0.75% to 1%. It's the fourth rate rise in a row, and it's the highest the base rate has been since early 2009. The Monetary Policy Committee is trying to calm inflation, which it forecasts will peak at over 10% this year. The bank's also expecting the economy to shrink by 0.25% next year. There are renewed calls for the government to impose a windfall tax on energy companies after oil giant Shell reported a big increase in profits. The company revealed record first-quarter profits of £7.2 billion, triple the amount it made in the same quarter last year. Surging oil and gas prices have helped offset the cost of boycotting Russian supplies. The Prime Minister took his dog Dylan with him as he cast his vote for the local elections this morning. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer's also voted alongside his wife. The Liberal Democrat's Ed Davey was seen visiting his local polling station too. Voters are choosing local representatives in England, Scotland and Wales, and there will also be an election for the Northern Ireland Assembly. A Ukrainian presidential advisor says there's renewed fighting at the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. President Zelensky is asking the UN to help ensure the safe passage of 200 civilians from the plant. The UK and Japan have agreed a new landmark defence deal as the Prime Minister hosts his Japanese counterpart in London. It's Fumio Kishida's first official visit to the UK. The pact allows British and Japanese forces to deploy together to carry out joint exercises and disaster relief. And the Queen will miss the Royal Garden Party season and be represented by other members of the royal family instead. The head of state, who has mobility issues, has missed a number of events this year, but has been carrying out virtual engagements and her other duties. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. It's back to the briefing with Gloria De Piero in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
For my latest Real Me interview, I spoke to Peter Kyle, Labour MP for Hove and Portslade and the Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary. It's an inspiring story. He's dyslexic with a reading age of 8. Wasn't picked up till he was in his mid-20s, and he had a very tough time at school as a result.
Peter Kyle, lovely of you to join me.
Thanks for having me.
You're dyslexic, and I want to talk about your experience of dyslexia. You were put into remedial class at school. Tell me what happened.
Well, I was at secondary school. I went to, I think, what Alistair Campbell used to call a bog standard comprehensive school in the 80s. It was a very kind of Grange Hill experience. And they just didn't know what to do with me, is the truth, because I wasn't succeeding at school, and yet I was socially quite likeable and quite active and capable. And yet, when it came to submitting work, it was pretty illegible and it wasn't coherent, and there were some mistakes you would expect from people who aren't socially aware. So they just didn't know quite what to do with me. So I went through all these different things, and I was put in different streams and different classes, and then I ended up in remedial, which is just a class back then at the end of school where you would do an extra hour or so of work. So I would be in a classroom standing at the front of the class on the blackboard at the time and just doing these repetitive, making shapes like loops across the blackboard and filling it up and then rubbing it out and doing another shape all the way across. But remedial was also for people who had behavioural problems. So most of the people that ended up there had behavioural problems. So I was there at the front doing these loops, and there were chairs coming across because their fights would always break out. The teacher really didn't want to be in the room because it was a difficult room to be in. So the teacher would always make an excuse to get out, and there'd be this crashing and banging and walloping, and I would be trying to do these things so I could just get out of the room. So it was that was what it was like. I didn't know what it was. Nobody mentioned the word dyslexia. I just knew it wasn't working. So it was difficult.
You're 51 now, and so it's a fair amount of time ago, but still not very long ago at all.
Well, what was long? I'll say what there is a lasting memory is, I mean, I think the most powerful human emotion is humiliation. And there was a couple of moments in my secondary education where I was just outright humiliated for not being able to read properly. And there's one moment where a teacher stood up and we were in English and we were doing Shakespeare. And suddenly, even though we weren't reading aloud, and we were just reading the text and talking about the text, the teacher suddenly said, "Peter, why don't you just stand up and read this chapter?" And I was so shocked because the teacher would have known full well that I wasn't capable of doing it, and asked me to do so. And the teacher was falling about laughing as I was doing it one word at a time with the pause and getting words wrong. But I remember very well looking around the room, and there was a couple of kids who were sniggering, but most of the kids were with me. You know, they were as humiliated as I was. But that was the moment that I just switched off education. I just realised that I'm going to turn up, I'm going to get out as quickly as I can, but that's just not for me. So that is the moment. You know, when you say a long time ago, so many of those memories will have dimmed, they have. But when you are humiliated that's something that stays with you for life. And that was one of those really key pivotal moments for me, particularly at school, and my approach to schooling the first time round.
You must be angry.
No, I wasn't angry because I'm not an angry person. I wasn't angry then. I just dealt with it in my own way. But don't forget, I had to, you know, I left school, and this is the thing that's just driven me. I left school having not learned how to learn. I stumbled into work. I ended up working at the body shop. And erotic, I was the lowest paid person. what I had to do to get that job is a story in itself. I was the lowest paid person in the company, but because I worked on a Sunday, because I wanted to keep up and do with all my work without people knowing, I met Anita Roddick because she was the only other person that was working in the company on a Sunday. I didn't know I was dyslexic at the time, but I knew I had to do more than other people just to get by. And that was when we connected. She mentored me. When I was 25, she was the first person in my life to say, you should go to university. So I had to ended up, because I get rejected from university, I had to go back to the same secondary school at the age of 25 and spend a year just starting all over again. And that process was what politicized me, but it was also the process when I finally got into university. I ended up coming out with a degree and a PhD 6 years later. And that was the moment that I learned how to learn, was at university. And that is what turned around my life. You know, that's what created huge opportunities for me. Anita Roddick was the first individual that ever saw something in me that I didn't see. Sussex University, when I finally got in there, was the first institution that saw something in me that I didn't see and found a way of unlocking it.
That's really quite moving to hear.
But it's also why I'm so passionate about social mobility. It's why education is something that's just so fundamental to me. Because, you know, what else is education for if you're not helping people to learn how to learn? If you learn how to learn and you get a lifelong love of learning, then it unlocks a curiosity, it unlocks the sense that you can achieve lots of different things. Because if you want those skills, if you want to be able to do what she does or he does, then you can by learning. And you have the tools to do so, and you have the drive to do so, and you know that if you try, you will succeed. You know, that is what kids should be leaving school with, that feeling of achievement should you apply yourself.
I wanted to ask you just about something else which I had to sort of read a few times to actually, I still don't think I understand it. So you were sent to, quotes, a quack doctor, this was while you were a kid, who made me wear a wooden contraption on my head every evening. What?
Yeah, so after I said that publicly, my dad called me up and we spoke about it, because it was a school that sent me there. West Sussex, the county that I was educated in, they were the last, I remember them being the last county to recognise dyslexia, or one of the last. So they just didn't, it wasn't on their radar. The school knew that there was something wrong with me, they just didn't know what it was, so they were sending me off to all these different people for assessments, and it might well have been that my parents sent me off to get assessed. But anyway, this doctor gave me this wooden thing, which had it was attached to my head, and it had two sort of handles, and you just extended and retracted, and you had to focus on the end of one, and you had to do this 10 times in the morning and 10 times at night. And now, my dad says that they thought I had a wobbly eye, and that would fix the wobbly eye. And once the wobbly eye is fixed, then everything else would just fall into place. But clearly they were looking, what they should have been looking at was a bit behind the eyes, because there was something neurological going on. But, you know, there we go. There you go. I did as I was told. I was very earnest and, you know, I tried. I did it for a few nights anyway, and then...
My goodness. My God, it's like medieval. Now, so you're 51, as I mentioned before. You've got a reading age of 8.
Yeah.
You are in the Shadow Cabinet. You are a successful member of Parliament. You speak a lot in debates. You appear on television a fair amount for your party. What are the obstacles, or how do you do all those things?
Well, I learned at an early age before I was even diagnosed. I was diagnosed in my 20s, my late 20s. I think I was 26, 27 when I was finally diagnosed. When I was at university, I handed in my first assignment, and a tutor just called me in to see him and then said, go and get a dyslexia test. And I did. And then when I got the test back, because what happens is you get a report. It's not straightforward, a yes or a no. You get a report on your abilities, on the challenges you have, the barriers, and also the advantages you have, because dyslexia is extremes. So there are some things that you are very accomplished at. There are other things that you really, really struggle with. So on word association, for example, I was off the charts. I was in the top 1 percentile. In some other things, like word in comprehension and writing, I was in the bottom 2 or 3%. So just think of the extremes that means in your brain. When you actually, but when you're actually living it without knowing that, you know there are some things that are good at and some things you're bad at, but you don't see your life in those compartmentalized way, because you're doing word association plus you're doing writing and comprehension at the same time. So when you do get this granular data, so much just fits into place. So I never kind of had this moment where I would be like, right, that means I have to do this and I have to do that. But the knowledge of your strengths and your weaknesses was just so empowering. And the fundamental thing was, I've always known, but I knew for certainty at that moment, I would always have to work harder than other people to achieve the same in certain circumstances. So I do. So when I was on the select committee, you know this from your time in Parliament, select committee meets once or twice a week. There's sometimes 150 pages of briefing before it. You know, I would be sitting up longer in the evening to get that information into my head. But I've got tricks and tools that I've just developed. I'll be there with highlighter pens to remind me. I would be shortening certain sentences down. And I've got ways of getting that into my head. If I'm making a scripted speech, which is the most difficult thing that I'll do, then I'll just practice it more than others. And now I'm in the shadow cabinet. That's a more frequent experience. So I just have to, rehearse it and practice it more than others. There are certain words that you just stumble on. And I describe it like driving down a road, a smooth road, and suddenly hitting a pothole that you didn't see coming. So, and everything shudders. And, it's really uncomfortable. And it can be quite startling and quite difficult to recover from quite quickly. So those are the things that you have to, when you rehearse a speech, when you read through a speech, the thing you're trying to do is to try and find those moments and just get them out so that when you do it, you can have confidence from the start that you're going to get through it.
And you've never dried up. I've certainly never been aware of, when I was in Parliament with you, of you ever drying up. Just always thought, great speaker.
So that's very kind of you, thank you. Coming from you, who is an outstanding speaker, it's a real compliment. You know that when you're in those moments, your brain is often racing. Even Parliament and the Commons, even when it's calm, can be a really intimidating environment to speak in. So things in your head feel longer than it actually is. So you just get techniques. Part of the reason why I get very familiar with text before I read it from a written speech is that if those moments do happen, I usually have the knowledge in my head that I can carry on going, even if it's not being read from the speech. That happened with my maiden speech, where everything just disappeared off the page for a while and everything was swimming. It was the first time I'd spoken there and everything, and the nerves clearly played a part in it. And I just carried on going. And when you watch it back, you wouldn't notice the moment where I'm just doing it from the top of my head. And then if you can just relax a little bit, it kind of just comes back. But other times you just have to take a breath and you'll do something which will give the impression of action, even though something's paused in your head for a while. So you just get used to these sorts of moments. But, I think, it's not, there are strengths to it as well. I mean, when I do oral questions, when I do short interventions in the Commons, it's very, very, very rare that I'll use a speech. When I do interviews, the thing that I do most before doing an interview is just try and understand the argument very, very deeply so that I don't have to rely on notes to construct an argument, because it's very hard for me to read ahead, to speak and still be reading down the text. And I think that gives me, strengths in some interview situations. In other things, it's a challenge when you're doing an interview where there's loads of different topics and you do want to have the party lines in your head for those moments. But it's very hard for me to remember the line. Well,
it was very hard for me to remember the line, and I have no excuse. I want to ask you about your mum.
Yeah.
So your mum, Jo, she was a dental nurse. Mm-hmm. When you were 18, tell us what happened to your mum.
Yeah, so my mum and dad were very different, came from different backgrounds. My dad, I adore both my mum and dad. My mum's not with us anymore. My dad came from, a really difficult, tough background. He grew up in what he calls a slum in Liverpool, left school at 14, became an apprentice stonemason to his dad, and also his granddad was working with his dad as well. So you can get this is up in Liverpool. You can see the kind of family that we were back then. He was in the Navy at 16. Mum had a slightly different background, but Dad was just the most driven person that I have ever come across in my life. You know, he was going to get our family to somewhere different socially than he had set out from. So we were that classic family in the 80s that was just seizing every opportunity. Dad had a work ethic that was just extraordinary. When he left the Navy, he was a door-to-door salesman for Pilkington Glass up in Liverpool. He was going to night school in the evening. Every few years when I was born, which is down south, which is why my accent's different to his, every few years we were moving house, he was getting another car, we were moving forward. So even though we stayed in the same geographic area, we moved socially, you know, a big distance. But I say this to explain that, you know, my dad was very, very focused on that side of our family, the economic side of our family, the security side of our family life. I was therefore much, much closer to Mum than I was to Dad in those years, because I was just with Mum so much more, because Dad was so busy at work. So I adored Mum. I was incredibly close, and I was very, very attached to Mum. So at the age of 18, when I came home from work and there was a note on the table, I'd just started my first job, and I came home from work and there's a note on the table which I just ignored because it was quite a common thing to have a note on the table. And then Dad came home from work and then just you know, stood there shaking. And that was the moment we learned that she had eloped, run off, disappeared with my dad's best friend, somebody I considered my, you know, like a second dad to me. I was that close to. So this was something that was deeply, deeply traumatizing, shocking, and incredibly difficult to deal with at the time, because not only was it very painful for me to see your dad, who you adored so much, being put through so much pain as well, was something that was extremely difficult, and also for the other family that I was very close to. So it was a very, very difficult moment, no question.
Have you made peace with that moment?
It took a long time to make peace there, and you know, I lost my mum in 2012, and when she did, I didn't know where she was instantly for a few years. Her and the man who became her husband disappeared off. And a few years later, it was just before my 21st birthday, I got a call from her, which I just put the phone down on. But there was a lot of pain that took a lot of time to deal with. And she didn't want to talk about that side of it, which made me even more angry. So we did meet, we did spend time together, but we had to learn how to just sort of reset the relationship and form a new one, which is very difficult when it's your mum, because she remembers me when I was born, obviously, from that very moment, and she wanted to kind of carry on there. But I needed, as an adult, to have a different relationship with her, which took into account that particular moment in time and the pain that caused, and it took a long time. But we had, you know, she died of lung cancer that was misdiagnosed for 18 months. So by the time it was diagnosed, she had a very short amount of time left. But in that time, you know, we had the chance to kind of exhibit the kind of behaviour and the attachment that had always been there, even though it's sometimes difficult to do. And we had some conversations that were not sentimental, but were quite direct, and one in particular where we expressed our feelings for each other, which was just the most liberating moment. And I'm very, very, very grateful that we had those exchanges before she died. So I have fond memories of her. I wish so much that she was around to see me now, because she never found it difficult to express pride in her children, me and my brother, and that's something I think she would have taken huge pride in, the career opportunities that I've had and some of the success that I've had in public life, and I'd love for her to have seen it, because she was a big part of it.
She sounds great. What a story, what a life story. It's going to take some beating. Peter Kyle, thank you very much indeed.
You can watch my Real Me interviews on our YouTube channel. They're all there, or catch them on the Real Me podcast. Listen on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from. Just search for GB News. Now, today, thousands of people are standing for election. How does it feel to be a candidate? Well, our presenter, Alex Phillips, stood for the European Parliament elections in 2019. So we both know all about it, but Alex, you are the star. How did you enjoy being a candidate?
Yeah, I did actually. It's a lot of fun. I mean, I suppose my elections were slightly different, being that we had regional lists and the polling was sort of showing that I was going to get my seat. So there wasn't that sort of tension in the air of, oh, am I going to lose my job or not? But that's something I think a lot of people don't register. For politicians, and not just politicians, but their staff as well, it's do or die, isn't it? It's the make or break moment where you could be getting your P45 within 24 hours.
And candidates will have got up really early this morning. Well, they should have done. I mean, I certainly did on polling day, because you're anxious and you want to get out there and talk to voters. It's a long day, isn't it? Just tell us how the day pans out and when it finally ends.
Of course, because you have GOTV, as we like to call it, Get Out the Vote, which is a lot of traipsing around and knocking on doors and encouraging people to go to the polling stations. And some of the stories and anecdotes you get from door knocking are just fascinating, you know, that when you see the sort of length and breadth of the people in your constituency and don't always get a positive reception. But then, of course, it doesn't finish for most candidates until the wee small hours of the morning, usually in some sort of community centre or leisure centre with your polystyrene cup of tea where everyone's in their own little corners. And
I always wanted a drink of alcohol at
Of course you did.
Of course I did. But no. There's just polystyrene cups.
It is. It's sort of like, you know, polystyrene cups of tepid tea if you're lucky, and maybe a packed lunch to last you through the night. And, you know, lots of people sitting around trestle tables in their own little corners, suspiciously eyeing up the opposition, trotting over to where the votes are being counted and trying to sort of eyeball how many stacks of paper there are in which pile. And there's a real sort of sense of competition in the air as well. I think it's probably one of those occasions where, I mean, in a lot of politics, actually, behind closed doors, most opposing politicians can have a nice conversation and put the politics to one side. But when it comes to the count, oh, you feel it. It's very tribal.
So spare a thought for all those candidates who are vying for your votes today. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Join me tomorrow for live coverage of the local elections from 10 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock. We will be analysing the results with election experts, top politicians, and discussing what the results mean for you at home. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. But first, let's see what the weather is like.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Dry for many today with sunny spells, but there will be still some rain in the far northwest, mainly northern and western parts of Scotland, because of a number of weather fronts which are just toppling in over an area of high pressure. However, high pressure really here to stay for the next few days. That's going to lead to a lot of fine and dry weather, whilst these weather fronts will occasionally bring rain, mainly to the northern half of the UK. So a few showers for northern England, perhaps one or two showers developing over the West Midlands and parts of Wales into the afternoon. Otherwise, a lot of fine, dry weather for England and Wales, sunny spells in places, some thicker cloud at times for the Midlands. And with the sunny spells, temperatures reaching 22, perhaps 23 Celsius in the southeast. Cooler there towards the northwest, mid-teens. And for Scotland and Northern Ireland, a cloudy day with spells of rain for the north and west of Scotland. Those outbreaks of rain turn more persistent and heavy at times through the night. Also, they'll start to sink further south into the rest of Scotland as well as Northern Ireland. 12 Celsius for Glasgow, Belfast, 8 for Birmingham, 10 for London. So a relatively mild start to Friday, but plenty of dry weather for England and Wales at least, with some sunshine first thing. However, cloud and rain is slowly sinking south. It arrives into northern England, North Wales by the afternoon, and it will be heavy and persistent, particularly over, say, Snowdonia and the Lake District. Feeling unpleasant under that rain, 15, 16 Celsius, 22 or even 23 or 24 for London, cooler for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but brighter skies follow with some showers. Also for northern and western Scotland, and particularly they die away through the night on Friday, whilst our area of cloud and rain sinks south, peters out as high pressure builds, and that high pressure will lead to a lot of fine and dry weather through the weekend. Bye-bye.
Millions of people across the UK are heading to the polls in a vital test of Boris Johnson's premiership. This isn't just about Westminster. These are local elections. A chance for you to decide how your community is run. We'll be talking to senior politicians, election analysts, our team of reporters around the country, and of course, to our team here in the studio. And we'll have comprehensive coverage of the elections to the Northern Irish Assembly. That's the UK Votes 2022 from 10 a.m. tomorrow morning here on GB News, the People's News Channel. Millions of people across the UK are heading to the polls in a vital test of Boris Johnson's premiership. This isn't just about Westminster, these are local elections. A chance for you to decide how your community is run. We'll be talking to senior politicians, election analysts, our team of reporters around the country, and of course, to our team here in the studio. And we'll have comprehensive coverage of the elections to the Northern Irish Assembly. That's the UK Votes 2022 from 10 a.m. tomorrow morning here on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And